Martin Splitt from Google.
So nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks a lot for introducing me as well. And I'm really happy to see that this many developers made it out this early to learn about SEO. Because let's be honest, who here is a developer? Let's start with that, because cool. Keep your hands up if you worked with an SEO before. Keep your hands up if you liked that experience. Yeah. I'm in this really interesting position. So first things first. Hi everybody, how are you doing? Good morning. I'm really happy to see you all here. As introduced, I am a developer advocate. I work for the web ecosystem team at this tiny startup from Mountain View. It's called Google. You might have heard about it. It's pretty hot these years, I think. No, I don't know. So I have this interesting position of being a developer advocate and being a web developer myself. But I work in this team that's called the web ecosystem. And you might know some of my coworkers from the sister team, the web platform team. They talk to you about new platform features like new APIs. They have been talking about PWAs and service workers and all that lovely stuff. But all that is nice, but does it help you? Does it help you be successful if no one knows that your website exists? So I'm in this interesting position between SEOs and developers, being a developer myself and having former SEOs on my team and other developers, back-end developers on my team as well. We are trying to figure out how we can help you be more successful on the web, specifically through the venue of search. And as we are working at Google, we can't really help you with Bing or Yahoo or anything, but we can help you with Google search. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And today, I like to start with, what is this SEO thing and what do I believe it should be, right? The SEO can be many different things and can look very different depending on what the company or what your project needs. But I will give you my definition of SEO and how we as developers come into that picture and why we should care a little bit. And then I'm going to dive into Googlebot, how it actually works, how does your website get into Google search, and what can possibly go wrong. Because computers are very fast idiots and very pedantic, and as developers we know the computer doesn't do what we mean it to do, it does what we tell it to do, and so sometimes things go wrong. Unfortunately, I don't have all day to talk, so I'll leave you with a bunch of tips and resources that you can take to learn more afterwards. Cool, let's start with what is this SEO thing that everyone keeps talking about. And this was an infographic from Swiss television to describe a certain weather phenomenon, and I'm like, this is the best infographic to describe SEO, because a lot of stuff goes in and you're like, stuff happens, I guess. But let's look at it from my perspective. So whenever I had to deal with a good SEO, or when I had a success story about SEO, there were certain factors that came together. And these factors had a different mix in every different project. But basically in my book, and again, let me re-emphasize that's my definition of SEO, it starts with the content. So a good SEO talks to the business stakeholders, it talks to sales and marketing and maybe even customer support to figure out what is it that people need and what do we have to offer and how do people look for what we need. Because it's pretty cool if you are saying we have the new Flubber Blurb 5000, and that's ice cream. And I'm like, I want the coolest ice cream of Athens. And then I don't find your page because it doesn't say that it's about ice cream. So that's the very first step in an SEO process. You have to look at your content. You need to have something that your users want, and you have to have it available in a way that is accessible to your users. Second is strategy. They should also talk to all sorts of stakeholders around the business and figure out, what do we want? Do we want to have, do we already have a lot of people coming and they are leaving our page without doing what we think they should be doing, like buying our service or buying our products or subscribing to something? Who knows? Basically, we want to see how are we doing already and how can we improve that and what do we need to do on all sorts of levels, content, business, sales, copywriting, and technology as well, to reach these goals. And that, as I mentioned, it leads into us, right? We are the ones who know the technology the best in our company, hopefully. If you're building software and you don't know what you're doing, then you might suffer imposter syndrome. I'm pretty sure you know what you're doing. So Technology is what I will be focusing today about, because we can do a bunch of stuff that makes sure that our content is actually accessible to crawlers and also works well for users. But before I want to go into technology, I want to have one last example of why content matters so much and why we as developers can be an ally to our SEO friends or coworkers who sometimes have to fight an uphill battle. You know that, you fight that uphill battle as well, because if you're like, hey, our website is really slow and I would like to invest a week to make it faster, then business says like, yeah, we can do that later. How about this one more bug fix or this one more feature? And we know it's not one more bug fix or one more feature. It just, it keeps going on. And SEOs can be your ally and say like, actually, accessibility and speed or performance are very important factors, and they can sell it as a business case, so they are your allies. So be their allies if they say, we should start with the content, and then they're like, no, we just switched the framework. It's like, no. You as a developer can then say, well, it's pretty pointless to switch the technology if what we are having is chocolate ice cream smiley, as in not very good content. I mean, I like this emoji, but if your content or strategy aren't aligned, then no technical change will make any difference. You will be polishing a turd, and that's pretty pointless. So you want to make sure that you're on the good side of your SEO coworkers and help them make the right decisions and help them get the right decisions across the business side as well, if you can, if you're in that position. And to give you a very simple example, I'm German. I live in Switzerland, but I grew up in Germany. And so I grew up with the tradition of having proper breakfast. And I know that we have plenty of interesting bread varieties, but I kind of like my toast in the morning, but my toaster broke down, so I'm looking for a new toaster. Now I come to this website and I'm like, aha, so the picture looks promising, but then the website, the most prominent thing on the website just says, smart, simple, beautiful. That can be anything. I don't know what this website is about. So I keep reading because I'm unlike normal users who would already have left the page. And I'm like, it'll disrupt your breakfast. I don't want my breakfast disrupted. I want my breakfast to be peaceful and tasty. Okay? Don't disrupt my breakfast. Make my toast. That's what I'm asking you to do. And is it a toaster? I don't know, but it's apparently thermochemical food processing. Yes, I guess toasting counts, but so does cooking or microwaving a toast. And it's the best invention since sliced bread. Cool. Now, this page might not be very useful, but they have links on the top. So let's see what they offer me to do. So they offer me a philosophy. I don't want to join a cult. I want to buy a toaster. So thanks, but no thanks. And then they offer me, okay, what is this thing doing here? Well, that's, okay, better. They also offer me the hot bread X10, but I don't even know what the hot bread here is. Cool, but they have a call to action, and the call to action says join the movement, and again, I don't want to join a cult, I just want to buy a toaster. So this website is probably really fast. It is a PWA, it loads in under 1 second, and it's like it uses Broadly compression and HTTP2 push and whatnot, and it's really cool, and all the technology is in place, and it uses the best framework ever. But it's useless, because I still don't know what this is about. So let's make a small adjustment, same technology base, but it says it's the fastest toaster. Nice, that's good. It doesn't burn my toast, that's fantastic. It gets me my toast faster because it's the fastest toaster, that makes sense. And I should try Toasty McToasterface. Cool, so that's pretty good, that's good news. I'm on the right page because I want a toaster. But as a German, I'm very analytical and I have no sense of humor. So I want to make sure that my commitment to buy a toaster does not have knock-on effects that I haven't foreseen, because butterfly effect, that thing happens. I might start a tornado by buying this toaster, who knows? So instead of just buying one, I want to learn more. I want to figure out what am I even looking for when I'm buying a toaster. And sure enough, this website has me covered. It has a how to choose a toaster section. So I can actually figure out more about how I should make my decision. And if this toaster isn't what I should be buying, they also have a link for our other toasters. And if I'm sure this is the right toaster to buy, the call to action is buy a toaster. Same technology base, very different content, very, very different impact. So definitely make sure that if you see your marketing department putting in interesting copywriting like the previous page, to voice that concern. You have a voice. You can say, I think technology isn't our problem when it comes to SEO and search. I think our problem is the content. You don't have to write the content. You can, hire a copywriter. They're really good at writing content. And some SEO consultants also have contacts to copywriters to help you with this. So, point being made, technology isn't everything, but technology isn't unimportant either. So let's get into technical SEO. Conveniently, technical SEO isn't as scary as some people make it look. So you don't need like a helmet, safety glasses, or gloves. You can just dive in with your, text editor or IDE of choice and framework of choice. But I think first we need to understand, how does a website end up in Google search? Actually, this is more or less the same for all other search engines as well. There are differences, and I can only speak for Google search, but basically the rough steps are the same for all search engines. It starts with a list of URLs. We find a bunch of URLs at the very, if you would start a search engine today, you would probably start by compiling the 1 million or 10 million or 20 million or whatever most popular websites that you know of, and you would start by crawling those. And basically you do that by putting them into a list. All these URLs go into a very long list, and then you have a program that's called the crawler, fetch that. So what does fetch mean? It makes an HTTP GET request, because it's a website. We're talking about websites, so we make a GET request to get that specific URL. That returns a bunch of data, obviously. If it's an image, it's an image. If it's a PDF, it's a PDF. But if it's a website, which is what we care about as web developers, we get a bunch of HTML, we get a bunch of linked CSS and JavaScript and stuff. And then the next stage is to process that. And as an optimization in Google search, what we're doing is, if we get the HTML from the original crawl request, we can already look through the HTML to see if there's any links. And if there's any links, we can already take them and put them into the crawl queue, because links are kind of interesting, right? There's more pages here, more URLs, so we can put them back into the URL queue, and then the next crawl instance comes and does the same thing. But that's not the only thing that happens. Two more things happen. First things first, if we see content on this page, then we can find out what this page is about, and we can put it in the index, right? But a third thing has to happen as well. Because if you build a JavaScript single-page application with any of the modern frameworks these days, you're very likely to end up having HTML that doesn't really have content, just like loads from JavaScript, and then the JavaScript loads and generates the content. So if we would put that in the index, we don't know what this page is about, because we can't see the content. We have to run the JavaScript first. Now, the web is pretty big. Googlebot or Google Search knows over 130 trillion URLs. That's one with many, or 13 with many, many zeros after it. So we can't render them all in one go. We can't execute JavaScript for all of these in one go, so we have to queue them. So basically, we put the URL into another queue, and then we use a headless browser. We call that our renderer, or web rendering service. And we use a headless browser that basically opens the page, executes all the JavaScript, and then generates the content, and then takes that content back into processing. That's when we do, again, extract the links that we found and put them in the queue. And now that we have all the content there, we can again index it. Notice that I'm basically describing 3 stages here. Crawling, we fetch a URL from the internet using HTTP. Then we have rendering, we execute the JavaScript and actually make sure that we see content that is generated by JavaScript, and indexing. Not all search engines execute JavaScript. The rendering stage is not always there, but for Google search it is. Google search does have this stage. But there's one more stage that I deliberately do not talk about, because it's very complex and it is not that much that you as a developer can influence, and that's ranking. Ranking is, we have a bunch of websites about toasters in our index now. We know that they exist, we have found them, we have rendered them, we have put them in the index. And now the question is, what is the best website for this particular query that a user entered? And that might be different, right? There might be a website about how to choose the right toaster for you. There might be a website about the fastest toaster. There might be a website about the cheapest toaster. If I'm searching for cheap toasters, I might not want to learn how to choose a toaster. I might be more interested in the cheapest toaster rather than the fastest, which might be more expensive. So we have hundreds of ranking factors that we are looking at, and that figures out which website goes where in the ranking. Very different thing. let's not talk about it, very complicated. I can't actually share that much about it either, because if I would, people would game it, and we don't want that for obvious reasons. So all we're talking about today is crawling, rendering, and indexing, and that's what you should actually care about as developers the most, because that's what you can directly influence as well. Cool, so now we know how things get into Google search, and we have established that we can run JavaScript. You might encounter SEOs that say like, yeah, but Google uses this really old version of Chrome to do that. That's outdated information. At Google I/O, we announced that we are now using a modern Chrome, and we keep the Chrome updated over time. So if you want to learn more about what that means, there's an article that I wrote that explains it in more detail. But Googlebot has now an evergreen version of Chrome. So it's the same stable version of Chrome that you might be using. Very important. You do hear the number Chrome 41 sometimes. That used to be true. It is no longer true. Cool. So what we now have established is we do execute JavaScript. So web pages like this do not mean nothing to us. You might have problems with other search engines with markup like that, but Google Search understands it as long as your JavaScript works. So that's, yay, that's good news. You can actually use your JavaScript framework, but that doesn't mean that everything goes smoothly, right? Earlier last year, I learned how to fly a paraglider, but it's actually not that hard of a process. But I made a tiny mistake here, and try to spot the mistake. If you know how to fly a paraglider, you might spot the mistake. It's a tiny mistake. I fell on my face. Yes, that's the result. That's not the mistake I made. The mistake I made is I hold, right there, I hold my arms the wrong way. I hold my arms like this when I should have them like this. That's the difference between flying and ouch, okay? And it's similar when you do web development. There's many, many moving parts, and front-end development is actually hard, even though some weird gatekeepers think it's not. Screw those people, because it actually is quite tricky, and there's a bunch of stuff that can go wrong. So sometimes you might find out that you are not showing up in search, or only some of your pages are showing up in search. Well, my homepage is in search, but all the products that I sell are not. Well, why is that? And then usually I come back with a question and say like, well, how are you linking your pages? Because, you know, that's kind of important. And I can't believe that I have to say this in 2019, but people making these mistakes, so I'll talk about this now. This is a link. This is a good link. Why is it a good link? It uses the link tag, it uses the href, and it has the URL in the href. Very good. Congratulations. This has been there since Web 1.0, like this is in the original specification, and it continues to work. Surprise! The browser support is fantastic. This is also okay. You're still having an A tag, you're still having the href, you're still having URL. You'd use some JavaScript to intercept that, to have like some AJAX-y transitions and stuff. Like this is single page application one-on-one. That's fantastic, that's not a problem either. But what is this? Well, this is a link, but it doesn't go anywhere, technically speaking. Googlebot doesn't click on your stuff. We look at the URLs. There's no URL in here. We're like, okay, next. Thank you, next. Yeah, okay, this has an href, but this technically still doesn't go anywhere because the empty fragment, or any fragment really, is just a part of the existing content that we are on at this point. So it's not really taking us anywhere else, so we can ignore this link as well. No, still not right. It's still not a URL that we can go to. It's still JavaScript that we need to execute. How do we put this JavaScript onto a URL queue? Remember, we have this URL queue that we are using for crawling. What URL do we put here? What JavaScript do we execute when we have no page open? No, this is not a link. You can tell by the different HTML tag. The rule of thumb is, if it takes the user to different content, it's a link. If it does something else when you click on it, it's probably a button. But this is not a link. And this, like, no. 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 You could use a diff for this, but then it would be just as shit. So like, no. Use proper link markup. Do not use any of the other variations. Stick to the link markup. It works. It has been battle tested, and it is there for a reason. And on the topic of URLs, so we see here this is like a different path, so it takes us to a different document. Very clear that we probably want to crawl these. But you know, there's also these hash things here. So you see like page hash subsection. That's very nice. But that just means a different part of the content. So we have a bunch of content, and then we want to address this specific part of the content. It's not different content. However, when we originally invented single-page applications, we wanted to have a navigation without the page actually reloading. We wanted to use AJAX, like fetch requests or XHR, to fetch different data and change the content. So we did a hack. We did a hack, and we used hashes and the change of hashes to actually load different content. But it's a hack. You know, it's not great. We had a workaround for this hack that somehow worked mostly, but it was very, very complex and it caused a lot of problems, and other crawlers just didn't have it either. So luckily, we have a better way of doing this. We have the History API. The History API allows you to basically have navigations like this and change the history state, and the browser back and forward button continues to work as you would expect it, but you get a proper URL for a different piece of content rather than the hash hack. Yeah, but Martin, what about the browser support? Well, I have good news. Browser support is actually pretty well. We have Internet Explorer 11 and pretty much everything else on the board. If you are on a computer with Internet Explorer 10, you're probably not on the latest Mac Pro, so your JavaScript execution is probably relatively slow. So the worst thing that can happen with a browser that doesn't support History API is that it actually loads the page, like it flashes a blank and then loads the actual page. But that's still faster and actually a better user experience in most cases than having to wait for JavaScript to execute, which might not execute because it's ES6, and that also doesn't work in the IE10. So I would not argue with backwards compatibility here. Okay, so now our links are discovered because we actually use proper link markup and proper URLs. But you might use a tool called Search Console from us that tells you how you're doing in terms of search indexing and crawling. And then you see a message like this: discovered and currently not indexed. What does that mean? Well, it means that your page is still stuck in the crawl queue. So we have found it, but we haven't actually crawled or indexed it yet, right? Remember, we need to fetch it. Now, why don't we fetch it all in one go? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. So we have a thing called crawl budget. Crawl budget is influenced by two things: the crawl rate, which is how often can we crawl your pages, and the crawl demand, which is how often should we crawl these pages. Now, what does that mean specifically? So the challenge for us is we want to be a good citizen of the web, and we don't want to kill your server. Servers can handle load very differently, right? So, you know, you've all seen the angry unicorn on GitHub probably if you're using GitHub, or like some other 504 things, like, oh, this server is dead, we are very sorry. Things go down. And we don't want to overwhelm your server or actually take away from your users' experience by putting too many requests to your server. If you have 1 million products, we could crawl them all in one go. We could make 1 million connections. But if your server is like a Raspberry Pi under someone's desk, then this might not be a good idea. So what we do is we look at things like the HTTP status. This one says, all cool, good. It responds really fast. And we are at like 300 requests a second, so this is probably good. So let's try to up it a little bit to get more pages per second. Ooh, okay. So your server starts slowing down, so that means we are probably about to overwhelm your server. So maybe we should back off a little bit. So normally we would take that as a signal to crawl a little less, maybe stay with 300 requests a second, maybe we try 325, who knows? But basically we're like trying to back off if we are overwhelming your servers. And if we would not back off and we would kill your server, that would not be very good, would it? So we are basically looking at these things, but if your server by accident gives us this because you have made like a flaky deployment or something, we might also back off a little bit and crawl a little less. Crawling less doesn't mean that we don't think your site is good. It doesn't mean that you're going to rank lower. It has no meaning on ranking or indexing. It literally has only meaning for crawling. It's how fast we're going to, fetch your sites or your pages. The other thing is crawl demand, because not all pages are equal, right? Some pages are really, really popular, and we measure that by many different factors. So we might want to check more often if they have new content. Also, some pages are just like news pages. News pages tend to change every couple of minutes maybe, or at least every couple of hours. Whereas a Wikipedia page probably changes once every couple of days. So we don't have to crawl every page the same frequency. We don't have to crawl everything every couple of minutes. We can't do that, so we have to be smart about it. And we are trying to do that by looking at various factors to do this. Again, neither crawl demand nor crawl rate have any impact on indexing or ranking. It's just how fast we discover updates to your content or new content. If you want to learn more about that and learn more on how to optimize your crawl budget, I highly recommend checking out the blog post we wrote a couple of years back. It's still valid, it's still up to date, and I highly recommend going there to learn more. Now, there's a few other challenges that we are seeing. So let's say I have a website where people upload their dog pictures. That's a fantastic idea. I encourage everyone to upload their dogs because we need more dogs on the internet. Cats are nice as well, but you know, dogs are dogs. We need them as well. And maybe I have a page for every dog that was uploaded. In this case, I have a page for Leica, and then I have the page for whatever is the top dog at the moment by rating. Now, this changes. So maybe I don't want that indexed. Because in this particular instance, both of these pages are the same content, right? But I don't want Google to choose top-dog because that's going to change. So if people are looking for Leica, they should see the other URL, the /dog/Leica. Well, I can do that, but I should also do that because it means that if we get these pages, we might crawl them all in one go. And waste crawl budget on them later because we index both of them, throw one away, but then we crawl one again, and it's a bit pointless, really. What you can do is you can tell us which of these two URLs is what we call the canonical, which is the one that you should be using. You can also use it across domains. Let's say you have a blog on one domain, let's say blog.com, and then you have your website example.com. And the content on both is the same because you are cross-posting, or you use, I'm not sure if Medium allows you to do that, but they should. If they don't, then someone should talk to them. I should have researched this before I said Medium. Anyway, any blog platform should allow you to tell tell the search engines that this is just a repost of something that you have somewhere else to draw the traffic to the right thing. However, as we have learned, you know, people make mistakes, that happens to the best of us, and sometimes the canonicals don't make sense. So we treat them as a signal. You'd basically tell, I would prefer if you would pick this URL over whatever URL you're coming from right now. And we'll be like, okay, that makes sense. But if we see that's not true, or if it's not working out for us, then we might pick a different canonical. To give you a simple example, there's a bunch of countries that speak German. So Switzerland and Germany both have a German-speaking population. With Germany, that's kind of obvious. With Switzerland as well, I think. But they might have the same content, because if there's like one e-commerce company that sits in both countries, they might actually sell the same things, and they might have the same product pages. But they might tell us in Switzerland, like, no, .ch for Switzerland is the canonical, and then for the same content, they also tell us, no, .de on the DE domain is the canonical for this, and we're like, hold on a minute, you're lying to us, both of this is the same. So what we'll do is we'll mark down that you told us, yes, both DE and .ch are both canonical URLs, and we'll be like, so these are country-level domains. So if you're searching in Germany, we'll show you the .de. If you're searching in Switzerland, we'll show you the .ch, but we're not going to crawl them all the time, and we're not going to index both of them. We're going to keep one copy until, well, every now and then we will recrawl them, and we'll figure out, oh, look, this content is actually different now, and then we might actually index it. But as long as we find with very infrequent crawling that the content hasn't changed, we're not going to put both in the index. But normally, if you tell us a canonical, we are picking it. If you have something that you don't want on the internet in search, then you can do two things. You can use a robots.txt. That's a file that we look into to figure out if we are allowed to get a certain URL or not before we crawl it. And then the other possibility is to tell us to no index something. And there's a subtle difference. So let's say I have a website with a really stupid photo of me, and it says like, stupid photo of Martin Splitt in high school, let's say. I don't want that in my search anywhere, so I put a robots.txt to prevent it from crawling. But now a bunch of people are linking to it from all over the internet, and they say Martin Splitt's stupid high school photo. And unfortunately for me, there isn't that much on the internet that has Martin Splitt's stupid high school photo on it, but Google has crawled the other pages and knows that there's a link to this specific one on my website, and then it doesn't know what is on the page because we can't crawl it, we can't actually see the page. But lots of people are talking about this being Martin Splitt's stupid high school photo. So we might still index it, We just don't have many signals. We think it's low quality, but if it's the only thing that we have in the index, or one of the few things that we have in the index, we might still show it to you in search results. Now, I don't want that, so how can I prevent that? Well, I do not disallow it in robots, and I actually use a no index. I send a no index tag through the crawler, and the crawler will be like, all right, so this doesn't go in the index, I just discard it, it's fine. That's the difference here. But if I would use both, that is kind of pointless, because if you remember, the robots tells us that we do not make a request to this URL. So we are not making this request to the URL, so we're not seeing your no index. So you want to be very careful with robots and no index. You actually want to be very, very careful. So here I'm using a mobile-friendly test. And there is supposedly, on the screenshot down here, there is supposedly a bunch of cat images. But no, there are none. Someone was a little too excited about robots.txt and were like, I'm going to manage my crawl budget with robots.txt. I don't think the crawler should make API requests. Except the JavaScript makes an API request to fetch the data for the images, for the cat images, and you have told us not to make that request. So we can't actually make the request to your cats, and we don't get the images in the page, so we can't index them. So you want to be really careful with your robots.txt and test that very carefully as well. The tool I've just used was called the mobile-friendly test. It's pretty cool. It doesn't just show you if it's mobile-friendly, the page that you're testing. It's also showing you JavaScript errors and console logs and page load issues like robots.txt and stuff. So it's really, really helpful. Now, what if you use URLs like this? Should you change that to a more clean URL? Nah, it doesn't really matter. We are fine. We'll use that. We'll use that to figure out, okay, there's some different content, and the content depends on the different parameters that you're giving us. That's perfectly okay. The problem is when you use parameters that are not changing the content. We can't easily tell those apart. So here, all 3 pages, the very one on the top and the 2 on the bottom, are actually the same content. So obviously, we're going to crawl them. We're going to be like, oh, these are actually, the same. And then we're going to throw them away. But you have wasted crawl budget. And because we are not sure if they are always going to be the same content, we might continue crawling them. So that's a little pointless. What you can do instead is you can tell us, this is just a different version from this. So if your server determines that there's a timestamp or a session ID that is per user because someone linked that on Twitter and then the link comes through to us because we have crawled that, then we might go to this and then you redirect us and tell us, actually, no. This is just a different version of, cat's ID 1234. In that case, we're going to remember that and not going to crawl these other URLs again, saving you some crawl budget. That's kind of nice. There's also something that we call soft errors that can impact both your crawl budget and your indexed search results. Now, what's the soft error? I go to this URL that clearly doesn't exist, and my doggo rating platform tells me, whoops, there's nothing here, sorry for that. And normally, we catch that in Googlebot. We have what we call the soft 404 detection, but basically what happens here is your server says 200 OK, this is a page that exists, and then gives us an error. So if we detect that, that's not cool. We're going to discard that. It's not, normally we catch it, but this is very tricky and fuzzy sometimes. So sometimes we don't catch these things, and then you end up with something like this. That's not exactly what you want to see in your search results. To prevent that, you have a bunch of options. One option is, the problem here being we are in a single-page application, so our server just serves the index HTML, and then the JavaScript determines if the page exists or not, right? It makes an API call, oh, this doc doesn't exist, and then gives you the error message. What you can do against that is you could go in your API call, you check if the doc actually exists, and if it doesn't, if this is an error, what you do is you redirect us to a page where your server is configured to give us a 404. In that case, what we are doing is we go to this URL, we execute the JavaScript redirects us to somewhere else, and then the server says this page does not exist, and we're like, okay, so this page is just a redirect of this page, and this page does not exist, so we're going to only crawl it very rarely, or if there's no links at all, then we're not going to crawl it anymore, ever, until we rediscover it eventually. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is you can use a meta tag. There's a meta tag named robots, and you can tell us to no index something. So what you do there is you figure out the doc does not exist, you use your meta tag somewhere in the head, and you say, as the content, I want no index. And that means that we're going to load the page, we're going to execute the JavaScript, we're going to see the no index, and we'll be like, all right, sorry for that, and we're going to stop indexing the page. Cool. There is hypothetically a third way, isn't there? I could have a meta name robots that is already put to no index here, and I could use that to basically say, do not index my page until my JavaScript has figured out that we actually have this content, and then set it to all, which means you can index. That's fine, right? Well, turns out this is actually not fine, and the reason why it's not fine is that if you look at it from the pipeline perspective, what happens there is we crawl this URL, we get the HTML where it says no index, the processor kicks in, and the processor goes, oh, no index. All right, we're done here. Whoops. We haven't actually run the JavaScript. So all your URLs are now being no indexed, and you have nuked yourself from the search index. Whoopsies, that's not very good. And there's other things that can go wrong. You could, for instance, have this GDPR issue where you're like, I'm just going to implement it on the main page and then do like redirects. So basically, I go to the home page and I get a little pop-up, and then I click on yes, sure, I accept your privacy policy and cookie policy and I don't know, whatever other blood draw policy, whatever it is. Because we don't really read them. We just click on OK, right? I mean, I reject whenever I have the opportunity. And when I don't have a reject button, then I start reading. Because I'm like, if they don't give me an easy way to reject, they are doing something shady here. Anyway, I'm digressing. So you're setting a cookie on the main page. And then, like, let's say it's a news page. You have a bunch of articles. So I go to your homepage, I get this pop-up, I click on yes, and I get a cookie set, and then I click on an article from your homepage. And then on this like article page, what you're doing is you check if the cookie is set and if the user has agreed to it. And if not, you redirect them to the homepage where you're showing them the cookie pop-up, and they can say yes, and then they can come back somehow. But there's a problem, because Googlebot will run into issues with this. The reason why is that Googlebot actually doesn't persist much data. We do use caching. That's the only thing we do. So what happens is, let's say you have 2 pages, a home page and some product page, and you have the same CSS on both of them. Then we're going to fetch we come to your website for the very first time with our crawler. We're going to fetch your home page, one request that we made. We're going to fetch your style sheet, second request. We find the link to your product page. We're going to fetch the product page. We see that there is a style sheet, but we use it from the cache. So we end up with 3 requests instead of 4. But that's the only persistence that we have, and we only do that for GET requests. If you make an API call with POST requests, that works, but we're not going to cache them. So in this case, if you use cookies or local storage or session storage or IndexedDB or any other way to store data across page loads, Googlebot is stateless. It's not going to keep the state persisted across different pages. So in this case, it comes to page B, it doesn't have the cookie, it goes to page A, it sets the cookie on page B, it goes to on page A, it comes to page B, doesn't have the cookie, and then no. We're not going to ever see page B. We think that page B is just a redirect of the home page. So that's not very good. Other things can go wrong, because sometimes features that you would expect on a regular user's browser are not there, or there is errors that you haven't thought of. To give you an example, you might have a global news page and you want to load the news that are local to the user. That's a good user experience, generally speaking. So you check, does this browser actually support geolocation? If not, then I'm just going to load some top news that are globally news. And if yes, then I'm going to load the local content. The problem here is that the fact that the browser has geolocation support doesn't mean that it gets the geolocation. Maybe your GPS on my phone is broken. Maybe I have declined the request because I'm going to ask the user, do you want to give access to your location to this website? And I'm like, no. And in that case, I don't get any content. Googlebot declines these requests, because why would you need access to like geolocation maybe, but like microphone or camera? Push notifications? Hell nah. So basically what you should be doing is you should handle the error gracefully. It gives you the possibility to have a fallback as the error handler, and then you could load the global content as well. So make sure that you are having every code path covered is also important for Googlebot. We have more documentation on these kind of things in our troubleshooting guide. If you have some specific JavaScript problems with Google search, you can find out why and solutions to fix them here. We keep extending this, so basically if you have a problem that is not discussed there, definitely reach out to us on Twitter and let us know, and we'll be happily extending our guide. Also, it comes to user experience in search. So your website might be about recipes. You have plenty of recipes and you're a fantastic cook and baker, and that's lovely. I love the Great British Bake Off. It's one of my favorite shows. I could watch that forever. I think that might have something to do with my weight gain. Anyway, but the problem here is if I'm looking for an apple pie recipe, which of these do I click on? I don't know. It doesn't really help me. One of them might be actually the recipe that I care about. So don't do that. Don't give us the same title for all of your pages, and don't give us the same description for all of your pages. If you have a meta description, that's the blocks that are displayed below the title. Instead, if you give us a more useful title, and you can do that, then the user has a better experience figuring out which page might be the more useful page. So if you're seeing that your pages are getting lots of impressions in search, but not that many clicks, those are the two things that you might want to talk to your SEO about, what you can do better there, or check if your pages are actually having unique and helpful titles and descriptions. The way to do that in the different JavaScript frameworks, I'm going to list 3 of them. In React, you can use the React-Helmet extension. It's a node module that you can install from Yarn or NPM, and it allows you to use component properties to figure out the description and title for this specific page. Let's say if it's like a different product, if it's pages for different products, you want to probably load the product and then use the product name in the title, something like that. You can do that with React Helmet, works pretty well. If you're using Angular, they have something built in. They have the title and meta services, does the same thing. You can use component properties to define the title and the description for each of your pages. Now, what about Vue? Well, Vue also has this Vue-meta package that you can use. It allows you to do the same thing as with the other frameworks. With Vue.js, you also want to make sure that you're not using hash routes. You want to make sure that you're using History API. If you want to learn more about that, we have a series called JavaScript SEO on YouTube that goes into more details on all of these 3 frameworks. But not all crawlers are even supporting JavaScript. I said that multiple times, right? So what do we do with them? Well, you could actually use server-side rendering and hydration. That also gives your users a better experience because it's usually loading faster. You can also pre-render. If it's a blog or a marketing page, you know when the content changes, so you could like pre-render it on deployment or build, and then basically use static HTML to ship that to the users. Alternatively, you can use something that we call dynamic rendering. Now, dynamic rendering is a workaround, and it roughly looks like, I'll come to that in a second. Let's look real quick at server-side rendering. For React, there's something called Next.js. For Angular, it's called Angular Universal. For Vue, it's called Nuxt.js. These are higher-level frameworks that are basically giving you hydration and server-side rendering for your pages that are more or less the same code base as you would write for a normal React, Angular, or Vue application. If you want to pre-render, there's a package called React Snap that basically uses a headless browser to crawl your page and then create HTML versions of all of the content, which is kind of nice as well. If you can't use these because it might require code changes in your code, like pre-rendering, for instance, you need to check if you're running on the server or in the browser. If you can't invest on making these changes, if you don't want to make changes to your front-end code, you can use a workaround called dynamic rendering. Now, dynamic rendering, what it does is, it does pre-rendering, but only for crawlers. Crawlers tell you that there are crawlers in the user agent. So if a browser comes to your website, you just ship your normal application code. But if a user agent comes that looks like a crawler, you pre-render it using a headless browser. You can use Puppeteer, Rendertron, prerender.io, something like that. And you send a static HTML version to it. Why is this a workaround? Well, first things first, it increases your load time, and it doesn't really, it's not a long-term strategy because it doesn't provide you with the best options. Because your users are still getting the probably slower JavaScript client-side rendered page. Usually, server-side rendering works better in the browsers than actually, you're shipping HTML, it can be parsed as it arrives. With JavaScript, that doesn't work. If you want to learn more about dynamic rendering, we have an article and a code lab and a video on that as well. Cool. Now let's wrap it up real quick because I'm pretty much out of time. I would like you to test your pages every now and then. Normally, things should be fine, but you definitely can check them. Either you use Search Console, which is a more proactive site-wide monitoring tool, or you use the mobile-friendly test, where you just put in a URL, and that can be like a proxy. You can use like ngrok to proxy your local development environment and test the URL and see what Google's going to get the actual HTML that Google uses for indexing. You should consider the investment into server-side rendering or pre-rendering, because shipping HTML to the browser is usually faster than shipping client-side rendered JavaScript. And you don't want to just write lots of divs. Please write semantic HTML. It's better for accessibility as well as for crawlability. So use proper markup. If you have something specific that you want to highlight, you can also use structured data to learn more about, or to help crawlers better understand what this page is about. And we have guides for you in the documentation that you can check out. They cover pretty much everything. It's a getting started guide with search for developers, basically. You can also check out our videos. We have lots of videos available on our YouTube channel. And you can also come to our online hangouts that we do every couple of weeks and ask us questions in person, kind of like over a hangout, really. You can also post the questions on YouTube, and we record them, and they are on YouTube as well, so that you can read up on them if you can't make it to the hangouts. If you have very JavaScript-specific questions, I highly recommend the JavaScript Sites Working Group mailing list. That's a really good resource to ask questions specifically around JavaScript. And we keep you updated on the blog. Highly recommend checking out our blog every now and then, and definitely follow us on Twitter. And with that, thank you very much. Have a fantastic day. I'll give you this one.
Thank you, Martin.